And we're recording it. So what we'd like you to do today, we want this to be interactive. We want you to get your questions answered. So we'd like you to submit the content related questions using the chat feature. You're encouraged to do so throughout the presentation. So there's no need to wait until the end of the presentation or the Q&A part. Just go ahead and get your questions out there. Those of you that haven't used Zoom before, which I'm guessing isn't many of you, but there is a chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and that's where we'd like for you to put your questions. If we can't answer your questions today, we'll be logged and we will answer them later. So if we don't get time to get to your question, or it's something that we need to research, we will get the questions answered to you as soon as we can. All right, so here's our agenda for the day. We're going to do introductions. We're going to do the overview of the cohort. We're going to do a quick recap of the narrative in case those of you were not here. And then we're going to do the budget overview. We're going to look at sample line items and determining amounts for the construction type projects. We're going to do the same for non-construction projects. And we're going to talk about amendments. Jennifer is going to talk to us about DRGR. And then we'll have a dedicated question and answer time at the end where we'll be able to, any questions we don't get to along the way, we will answer at the end. Okay, and as I said, I'm Stan Fitterman with TDA Consulting. I've been doing HUD, CPD, home, CDBG, other program work for about 25 years. I also have experience as a developer of affordable rental housing as well. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jennifer, to let her introduce herself.
Great, thanks, Dan. Hi, I'm Jennifer Alpha with TDA Consulting. I've been with TDA about 12 years, but working in community development and affordable housing for over 2 decades. For CPF cohorts, I will be seeing you again for the form session in a few weeks. And I think, Stan, you'll be seeing folks again for environmental coming up next, right?
Correct.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Right, and then Chantel, I believe Chantel's here.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Chantel James. I'm the Deputy Director of the Congressional Grants Division here at HUD. Welcome. We're very, very excited to be able to offer this resource to our grantees working with TDA Consulting. We hope that this provides you valuable information to create your grant package for us to administer your award. I'm here to answer any question and help our contracting partners answer any questions. And we also have a grant officer on, I believe, Tracy Rowe.
I thought I saw her. No, I'm not seeing her.
That's okay. Well, I'm here, everyone, and
Yes.
we'll have grant officers pop in and out to be able to assist with answering any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you. And Jennifer, do you want to take over and do the polls?
Yes, I can absolutely do that.
Okay. I will see if I can. Let's see if I'm smart enough to launch them.
I can grab it if
okay, I think you can. I think you need to grab it. I'm not seeing
okay.
the.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So just one quick second. I keep getting these pop-ups with folks still joining us, which is fantastic. Let me clear those out of the way. Okay. So actually, Sonia, I don't think I was made the admin.
I may.
Yeah, I don't.
You are co-host. Let me see if I can.
I am. Polls feature isn't showing up here for me.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it either. All right.
See what's. I can't see it either.
You can't see it either. Oh, wow.
No, that's
Strange.
see what's happening. Back to you through the chat, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Well, we can do it in the chat. We can certainly do it in the chat. Just see what responses roll in. I know our first question was to ask where folks are at in the process of submitting their application materials. So if you, so I'll just pose the question. Have you yet submitted your application materials? You can just answer yes or no
In the chat. Yeah.
Then we'll see what rolls through here. Let's do a best guess about numbers. Looks like lots of no's, which we would expect. Yes, pending review, only the ER. Waiting for this call, then submitting. Excellent. Good. No. Great. Great. That's great. Thanks, everyone. This is helpful for us to understand where folks are in the process. Looks like most folks have not submitted yet, which makes a whole lot of sense because these cohorts are designed to assist you in understanding what you need to do for your submission. So thanks for answering that. And I know another one of our questions was whether you've received federal funds in the past. So just answer yes or no. Yes, you have received federal funds in the past, or no, you have not. Oh, this looks like more of a little bit of a mixed bag. Lots of yeses coming through on this one, actually. Good to understand that. Great. Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, it looks like a lot of folks actually have received federal funds in the past, which will be really helpful for you as you go forward, understanding all the federal requirements that come along with using the dollars. So thanks for that. But if you haven't received it in the past, there are many guidance documents available for CPF specifically, and then of course more broadly as well. But that is great to know. And then the final poll question we would pose to you is, have you signed up for the HUD Exchange mailing list for CPF? Yes or no? Have you signed up for the HUD Exchange mailing list? And you would find this mailing list on the HUD Exchange if that helps jog your memory at all about whether you may have signed up.
Lots of no's.
Yeah, lots of no's. That's important for us to understand. We're going to talk about that mailing list here in just a second. But thank you for answering that one. The HUD Exchange mailing list is going to be a wealth of information for you because it is going to keep you in the know about any new guidance documents or new information that the CPF team wants to make sure all the grantees are aware of. So we're going to talk about how you can sign up for that in just a moment. So,
All right, ready to move on?
yeah. So here is a slide on the HUD Exchange. So this is showing just a screenshot of the CPF page from the HUD Exchange. And you can see here on this screenshot that there's a little call out box for guides, one for program support. And in there, you're going to be able to get access to things like ask a question, to submit requests for assistance and things like that. So that's a really important link for you to have. There's also links to systems that will be used as part of the CPF program, and then your policy guidance documents. And that's where you'll find a lot of the guidance documents like the FAQs, any instructional information and things like that. So definitely acquaint yourself for this HUD Exchange page. Go to the next slide.
Yeah.
And the Ask a Question is a really wonderful resource for folks as you have questions, as you're going through the development of your materials, as you're starting to think through implementation of your program. Ask a Question gives you the opportunity to submit a question through the HUD Exchange. It goes to program experts and they will get back to you with an answer. So you'll never be kind of left in the lurch in terms of not being able to access someone to help you through this process. So definitely use the Ask a Question feature, and then you can request more in-depth assistance if you need it as well. And then this is the page that shows you the HUD Exchange mailing lists options. So as you can see, there are lots of checkboxes here on this page. That's because HUD implements many mailing lists for the different programs. So there's actually a very specific mailing list just for DRGR. We're going to talk about DRGR later, but there's also a very specific mailing list just for the CPF program. And so for all of you who had mentioned in the chat when we asked the question, have you signed up for the mailing list? If you said no, or I don't think so, this is where you want to head. You want to head to the HUD Exchange page. You can just go to the search and say mailing lists. It'll take you to the subscribe page, and then you can very quickly subscribe to the CPF mailing list. And that will get you all of the late breaking information about the program as guidance materials are provided as they become available and get posted to the HUD Exchange. You'll get those news alerts. Great. So now we're going to just go into the overview of the cohort program. So for the cohort program, we know that the purpose of this program is to assist CPF grantees with completion of required data for grant execution and project initiation. So basically, we're here to help you through that process of gathering all the information for your materials and making sure it's getting into the materials in a way that's going to help HUD approve them faster so that you can get to the execution of your grant agreement and begin implementing your project. So the cohort series is delivered over 4 sessions. There was a narrative cohort initially. That was the first cohort, and you will have completed that one already, or maybe you missed it, but we're going to give you a little recap of that in just a moment. Today's session is on budget, so we're going to be getting into the specifics of the budget today. There will be a follow-up office hours next week on February 27th from 2 to 3, where you can come and bring your more detail-oriented questions about the budget that you are creating for your program. That's an opportunity to ask those more case-specific questions, take the information you're learning today, dig into your budget preparation a little bit, and then, come back and to office hours and ask the things you need to ask in order to complete your budget. From there, we're going to move on to environmental on March 7th, and then the form session on March 21st. And that will wrap up the cohort. And so with that, we will move over to talking about the session 1, which was on narratives. And for session 1, we talked through how you create your narrative, making sure everybody understood that there isn't a specific template for the narrative. You don't have to use a specific outline, but there are specific content areas that have to be covered in your narrative. So we'll just give you a real quick recap of those content areas here. Again, you can refer back to the slides that are available for that session 1 if you missed it. You can also look at the grant guide, because the grant guide is going to walk you through all these different components as well. So for your project description, you're going to have 4 content areas. You're going to have the project description narrative. You're going to discuss the metrics. You're going to have a timeline and describe the status. And then to the extent you are using subrecipients, you're going to talk about those proposed subrecipients. So we'll go through each of those just real quickly. For the project description, project name, address, purpose, describe what the project is about. That description needs to match your joint explanatory statement, unless that's been corrected or amended. And you want to make sure you're describing all of the actions that are going to be undertaken as part of the project, regardless of the funding source. So no matter how you're funding the project, you want to talk about your entire project, even if CPF is just a part of that overall project. So that's how you're going to describe it in the narrative. The second part, project metrics. This is where you're going to talk about your goals, outcomes, and objectives. You're going to include here your outcome measures as they relate to Section 3 if Section 3 is triggered. So your total labor hours, your Section 3 labor hours, and your targeted Section 3 labor hours. If Section 3 is triggered, you'll talk about those here in that metrics section as well. But overall, you're going to describe your goals and outcomes as well as your objectives. The third part of the narrative component is the timeline and status. And so for this component, you're going to talk about the current status of the project. We know that some of these projects were dreams before CPF came along. And so we want to hear about what is the current status of the project, provide the proposed timeline. So what are your estimated start dates and end dates for the project? And then also describe any steps you've taken towards environmental review. Remember that environmental review is the next session of the cohort. So if you're not there yet, that's okay. Attend that session and you'll learn a lot more about what needs to happen so you can better describe your environmental review status. And then finally, if you are using subrecipients, you want to talk about your proposed subrecipients in the last part of the narrative components. You want to describe why your project is best implemented with subrecipients, and then you want to describe the scope of their role for each of the subrecipients that you might be using. And that is the summary of what the narrative will look like. Again, lots more detail in the grant guide as well as the slides from last time, but we wanted to reorient everyone to the things we've already learned about in the cohort series. So pass it on to Dan to get into the meat of today, which is budget.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. All right, let's talk about budget basics. First, a line item budget must be submitted with your grant agreement. So we're going to get to a sample of what that can look like. There's not a mandatory template, but there are some sample templates you can use, or you can use ones that you created yourself, but it needs to be a line item budget. And the budget must be for the uses for the entire project. And we have to separately identify the CPF funds and the non-CPF amounts. So your budget's going to have two columns, one that has the heading of CPF, one that has a heading of non-CPF. The total amount of the CPF fund column has to equal the CPF award. If you need to do some rounding, but it needs to be, if you got $1 million, the total amount of the CPF funds you're going to spend in your project needs to equal $1 million. So line items, separately identify the CPF and the non-CPF amounts. The total amount of the CPF funds have to equal the CPF award to the dollar, to the penny. In addition to it matching how much money you got, it also needs to be consistent with your narrative and with that joint explanatory statement, which is the couple of sentences that Congress included to tell us how we're using what the project is for. So, for example, if your narrative says we're going to build something, there needs to be a line item for construction. That says we're going to buy land, there needs to buy a line item for acquisition. So the budget, the narrative needs to flow into the budget, and the narrative and the budget need to flow into the joint explanatory statement. The HUD recipients begin on that. We've got a link here for you, or you can Google it, but we've got the link here, and the HUD recipients begin on page S9406. Okay. You can create your own budget in Excel or Word or Google Sheets or Google Docs, whatever you use. The grant officers have said they prefer, if there's a lot of line items, that it be in an Excel format that they can quickly check the formulas on and make sure the math adds up, as opposed to if we do it in Word, they've got to either convert it to Excel or add things up manually, and it just takes more time. So if you have a lot of line items in your budget, the grant officers would prefer that you do it in a spreadsheet format, not required by any regulations, just a request. Now, in addition, we have put on Absorb, the system, the platform you use to register in, we've put sample formats from grants.gov. The SF-424 form, which is many of you have done federal funds before, so you may be familiar with them. There's one for non-construction programs. There's one for construction programs. If you were doing both construction and non-construction, so you're building a community center and you've got some money you're going to operate a program out of it with, then you would have line items from the construction and the non-construction side in your budget. These aren't mutually exclusive. It's just how the federal government in the past has broken these down. Okay, but I want to make it clear, you don't have to use those forms, the SF-424 forms, but you can. Okay. All right. Did we get the polls active yet? Do we know?
No, Stan, we will to use the
Okay.
chat for now.
Okay. All right. So let's use the chat for these questions. So true or false, the budget must include uses for the entire project with the CPF and non-CPF funds identified separately. So just do a true or false in there. All right, the answers are rolling in. All right, look, one more. Just about to say, it looks like it's slowing down. 5 more seconds. Okay, totally true statement. It must include uses for the entire project, and we have to have the CPF and the non-CPF funds identified separately. Okay, so next question. SF-424 forms for budget information for construction and non-construction projects. A, may be used as a template, must be used as a template, or cannot be used as a template. All right, looks like about half of you have done it. Another couple of seconds for anybody. Okay, so it is A. They may be used as a template. We do not have required budget templates for this program, but you can use them. So, but you do not have to. So it is optional. So A is the correct answer. All right. And finally, true or false, the budget does not need to be consistent with the narrative nor the joint explanatory statement, provided the budget includes an explanation of the differences. Right. And I am seeing a lot of the right answers here, which is that could not be more false. That is a false statement. The budget must be consistent with the narrative, and it must be consistent with the joint explanatory statement. We don't care about your explanations. That's not true. We care about your explanations, but it still has to be consistent with the narrative, and it has to be consistent with the joint explanatory statements. All right, good job, everybody. So let's look at a sample budget. So this is the sample construction format. Again, big note at the bottom, sample, not a required form. In this, these are the typical types of line items you would see in a construction budget. So we've got anything we're going to spend on admin for these funds, as well as our legal expenses. So we're more than likely, if we're setting up a limited liability corporation, we're going to need a lawyer. If we are, in some states, lawyers are required for any acquisition of any real estate. Anything else you need to spend your legal fees on. If we're buying something, that's what goes in line 2. So land, a building. If we're buying rights of way, if we're paying for, we would pay for an appraisal, pay for a survey. The soft cost is the cost of acquisition along with the soft cost. If we're buying something that is occupied and we're going to move people out of it, either residential or business, this is where we put our relocation expenses. Architectural and engineering fees. This would be something that we would get from an estimate. We would either have an in-house estimate that our project manager is doing, or we may already have some quotes or ideas of how much or we may have already procured our architectural and engineers, so we know how much that's going to cost. This other architectural engineering fees is for items that are done by architects and engineers, but aren't firms, but are not architectural engineering work. So it could be soil test, it could be studies about the site, but it's things that are done by those firms, but are not actual architectural and engineering. Project inspection fees. If we have other funders involved, it's likely and we're doing construction, it's likely they will want inspections. If we are, and we will likely want someone on our team who's going to be doing the inspections to make sure the work is being done right and it's the quality that we expect. This is where we put our inspection cost. Every new construction deal has site work. Sometimes with rehab, you have site work if you have to redo the parking lot or redo the drainage. So any site work that's going to be done is going to be here. Geotechnical work. If we're tearing something down, we're going to put it here, the demolition and removal line item. Construction would be our actual construction, what that's going to cost us. Equipment. For the federal rules, equipment is anything that is going to have an effective useful life of more than a year and costs more than $5,000. If your agency or local government has a more restrictive amount, then you would use that. So if your policies say $2,500 is equipment, you would use that. If you use the federal amount of $5,000, that means things that you buy that are less than $5,000 are supplies, and they're not considered equipment. So paper clips, Post-it notes, computers, printers, all now are less than $5,000. If that's your limit, they're not equipment. Miscellaneous, we'd want to identify any additional line items, but we would put those here. Subtotal, of course, is 1 through 11, what our total is for each column. In construction, things go wrong. In rehab, there's even a better chance that things will go wrong. So as a result, line 13 is here for our contingencies. So this is an amount we put in to cover the unexpected things, like in rehab, removing the wall and seeing the termites have eaten most of the studs, or anything else that might go wrong. Our contingencies need to be necessary and reasonable, because that's what 2 CFR Part 200 tells us. All costs have to be necessary and reasonable. Broadly speaking, you usually see 5% contingency for hard cost, 5% for soft cost for new construction. Again, broadly speaking, for rehab, 10% is usually a contingency that you see for rehab. We're then going to add all those numbers up to get our subtotal, and line 12 plus line 13. On line 14, we're going to have our subtotal. If there's any program income that's going to offset the cost of the project, very doubtful you'll have that. But if you do, you would put it on line 15, and then line 14 minus 15 equals our total project cost. So again, sample budget, sample line items, don't have to use it, do have to have this identify separately the CPF funds and the non-CPF funds, and the budget has to be for the entire project, all uses for the entire project. Okay, sample non-construction format. Personnel, we're going to figure out what our staff costs are, what a person's hourly rate is, or annual rate. If we expect them to do 25% of their time, if they have one person that's going to work on this and it's going to be 25% of their time, we would charge 25% of our time to the CPF budget. Fringe benefits, this would include FICA, health insurance, retirement, paid time off. Those are all allowable fringe benefits. We will calculate what the cost of those benefits are, and we often will convert that to an hourly rate to get kind of a loaded hourly rate for our personnel. Travel, if you're going to go somewhere, and you would put that here. Equipment, just like we talked about on the other grant with equipment and supplies, effective useful life of more than a year, costs more than $5,000, it's equipment. Otherwise, it's supplies. If we are going to contract with anyone to implement this program, we would put what that use is and put the amounts in the CPF and non-CPF columns. Anything else we're going to spend our money on that's not listed out on A through F goes on the other line G. We're going to then total those up, and those are our direct cost. We're going to talk about indirect costs in a second on the next slide, so I'm going to not address that yet. And then our total cost and our indirect cost are our total budget. So let's talk about indirect cost. All right, so the definition is cost incurred for a common or joint purpose, benefiting more than one cost objective, and it isn't easy to assign the cost it's not readily assignable to the cost objective. Without doing so much work, it's just not worth it. So let's talk about it. Let's look at an example. Your finance department. We could tell the finance department to track all the entries in the financial records they make for the CPF fund. We could then divide it by the total number of entries they make for the entire organization, figure out what percentage of the total entries are related to CPF, and then take that percentage for what that finance department costs and multiply it by it. So if it's 0.25% of all their entries, we could say, oh, we're going to charge 0.25% of this grant to indirect cost. That's absurd. That is an enormous amount of work for a tiny bit of results achieved. So instead, we have two options, okay? If your department or agency has a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, you can use it for this grant. Most folks aren't going to have one, but if you do, there were community action agencies seem to have the most, but if you've got a indirect cost rate negotiated, you can use it. If you don't have an indirect cost rate, you may elect to use what's called the de minimis rate, which is 10% of almost your entire grant. There are some things that are pulled out and they were listed specifically in 2 CFR Part 200.414, but it's 10% of your modified total direct cost. And the best thing about using the de minimis rate is that no additional documentation is required to justify the 10% de minimis indirect cost rate. So you either, for indirect cost, can use your federally negotiated rate or 10% of your modified total direct cost. And the definition of modified total direct cost is in our reference here at 2 CFR Part 200.414. And if you're still confused and need more information on indirect cost, on the HUD Exchange, there is a page where it has a link to supplemental information on indirect cost and a more detailed description of how that works. Okay, so as I said, when we do construction, things go wrong. When we do budgets, sometimes we don't get everything we were supposed to, or our needs change, or something comes in less than we thought it was going to be. So as acknowledging that happens, we can amend our approved budget. To do so, we need to submit a revised budget and a letter of justification on our letterhead to your grant officer. on your letterhead, not mine, on your letterhead to your grant officer. And in that letter, we're going to say the justification for the change, a detailed explanation of how the change is still consistent with congressional intent. So we're going to need to say that it's still consistent with the JES, and we need to explain why the change is needed. If you amend your budget, you can still make draws on the line items you didn't change, but you cannot pull money on the line items that are changing until the new line items are reviewed and approved by your grant officer. All right. Jennifer, this is you. Would you like me to keep driving or do you want to take over?
You can keep driving, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Great. So thanks for going up through all that. We have just a small overview of DRGR that we want to provide for you because eventually you will be in the DRGR system and you will be using it to process vouchers. That's how you access your funds. And so part of that process is setting up budgets in DRGR. And since this cohort session is about budgets, we want to make sure that everybody understands what's ahead, basically. So after approval of the narrative and budget and the execution of your grant agreement, you will be set up in DRGR. As part of that setup, you will then go into DRGR and build out your projects and activities in your action plan. And we wanted to give you kind of a high-level overview of what that structure looks like. So in DRGR, it's a hierarchy. And the hierarchy starts at the grant level, and then we work down into the draws. And so you can think of it like these little stacking dolls here. So your grant level is your total budget. And if you would happen to have program income, it's included at that level. I think most folks probably won't have program income for this program, but your grant level is your grant plus the PI. That's your total budget that you have to work with in DRGR and in your program. The next level is projects. So you're going to create a project, which is sort of like a bucket that holds your activities. In that bucket, we have any of the activities that you're going to develop will go into that bucket. I think most grantees for CPF might have just one project, but the system does allow multiple projects. And so for the project, you're going to establish a budget, and then within that project, you will associate activities. Now, the sum of all of your activity budgets is going to have to be equal to or less than the project budget. And so that's where these sort of stacking dolls come in. And so, as I said, a hierarchy. Your grant level, which is your total budget, you set up your projects. Within your projects live the activities. And if you have multiple activities, the sum of all of those activities cannot exceed the sum of your project budget that they live within. So, and then at the activity level is where we have all of our detail in DRGR. So this is where we're going to make the draws. This is where we're going to report on our outcomes. So the activity level is really the meat of DRGR. It's where all of the action lives. So within that activity level, you'll be creating obligations and then creating vouchers to draw your funds. So that's how that hierarchy works. This is just a quick screenshot on how you set up projects in DRGR. As I said, 2 levels, projects and activities. Project level, a little higher level, more of a bucket, not as much detail, but you still have to put a budget in there for your project. And so you'll put that project budget in, you'll fill out any other information with asterisks like the name and the title, or the number and the title. So this is just a quick screenshot of what that setup screen looks like, but keep in mind that there's a lot more guidance available for you when you do get to this stage. As I mentioned, this will not happen for most of you for a little bit of time. But when you do get to the stage where you have to set up your projects and activities, there is a DRGR quick guide on the HUD Exchange. There are actually step-by-step videos that you can watch to help you set up your projects and activities. And there will be more DRGR guidance coming as the program rolls forward. So that's projects. This next slide shows us the setup screen for activities. As you can see, there are more fields here on this screen. And that's because, like I said, this is really where all the detail lives in DRGR at the activity level. So here you're going to have more information that you have to fill out with respect to descriptions, status, environmental status, your responsible organizations, all of that information. But you will also have a budget here at the activity level, and this is the budget from which you'll draw for this particular activity. And again, you'll have lots of setup videos that you can review. Here are the 6 that are currently available. I know there will be more DRGR guidance coming as the program moves forward with implementation. So these videos already exist. So if you're a person who likes to work ahead, you could always go look at these videos right now. But you could certainly save them until you're ready to do these the setup at DRGR. But the ones that are currently available on the HUD Exchange are how to establish an action plan for review, how to add activities, how to add your responsible organizations. Every activity in DRGR has to have a responsible organization. That responsible organization has to be set up first before you add it to your activity. So that's what that's about. How to establish projects, how to set up performance and accomplishment measures, which are part of your activity setup. As I said, all the detail lives at the activity level. It's where you'll do your reporting. And then finally, how to add and change users in DRGR. There's a video on that. And when you get your signed grant agreement around the same time, HUD is going to go in and set up a DRGR account for the person who was named on your application materials. That person will have the ability then to go in and add additional users in DRGR. You will need at least 2 users. So you're going to need someone to serve as the draw requester. That's the person who creates the draws, and someone to serve as the draw approver, the person who approves the draws. And so you need at a minimum 2 users in DRGR. There are also other user roles in the system that you'll learn about by reviewing these materials. But you'll need at least 2 human beings. We always suggest that if you can have a backup for each role, that is really ideal. You never know when someone's going to be out of the office, change positions. I like to say win the lottery and not come back to work. So having a backup is always a good idea. So that how to add and change users video is probably going to be the first video you go to in this series. All right. And with that, that's just your high-level overview of DRGR. I bet we have some questions in the chat that we can move on to before we start talking about wrap up.
All right. So do CPF projects require prevailing wages? I believe what's meant by that, does it trigger Davis-Bacon and related acts? Which it does not. But if you have state money, if there are any other monies you have that would trigger it, then you would need to follow the rules of the other programs. So if you have CDBG money in it, that triggers Davis-Bacon and related acts, usually. But a CPF by itself does not trigger Davis-Bacon requirements. Is there a certain dollar amount where budget amendments are due? I might have to see if one of our grant officers could chime in on this, but I have not seen anything in the grant guide that has the ability to move line items without doing an amendment. Is that correct?
Can you repeat the question? I didn't quite
Sure.
understand what the question was. Stan.
As written, is there a certain dollar amount where budget amendments are due? So I think the question is there a certain amount that can be moved between line items or change the budget without triggering the amendment? So could you move 5% of the money from one line to another without triggering the amendment process? And I haven't seen anything in writing, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you got it right, Stan. So an amendment is not necessarily triggered by the amount. It's just triggered by the fact that you're changing the line item. So you would only need an amendment once you have a fully executed grant agreement with us. So right now, when you're submitting your materials, your budget, your narrative, and everything to get to an agreement, we're really looking for the amount that you were awarded and how you're looking to budget the amount that you're awarded. So at any given time, before you have an agreement that's signed by HUD and yourself, you can move those line items around. You can reach out to your grant officer. You can, move them on your own. We just want to make sure that all the activities that you're requesting are eligible activities and that the amount of your CPF award is fully allocated. But after your fully executed grant agreement, if you do want to change 5,000 from drywalling to acquisition, something like that, then you would need an amendment because you are changing the allocation of your itemized line items after we've already made an agreement with you, the grantee, on how you were going to spend those funds.
All right,
Does
great.
that
Thank
answer
you.
your question, hopefully?
I hope so. We'll find out if they type it back in. All right, thank you. The next question, if you have one project, will your project budget equal your grant amount? I don't know. It depends on what other sources you have. So if you have one project, but CPF is 50% of it, then no, the total project budget would not equal the CPF award. So not necessarily. If you have one project and it is 100% financed by CPF and there's no other money at all in the budget, then yes, it's conceivable that your project budget would equal your grant amount. Jennifer, I think that's the last question so far.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
Light on questions today, but that's okay. Hopefully everybody was just sort of soaking up the information, and you're going to take all these nuggets you learned, and you're going to sit down over the next week and start thinking about your budget if you haven't already started constructing it. And then you can come to office hours on the 27th with any questions that you might have developed over the course of trying to think through what the budget looks like, knowing what you know now from today's cohort session. So definitely come with any questions you might have. Feel free to use those templates and try to, work through them as just a starting place. If you don't have a starting place already, they're there for you to use. Again, they're not a required template, but just a place for you to start if you don't have one. All right, so that's awesome.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, as Jennifer mentioned, we'd like you to do a little homework between now and the office hours next Tuesday and see how much of your budget you can get done. And if you have questions, bring those questions to office hours. All right, and Jennifer, we had one more question about subrecipients. You had talked about that in the narrative part. Can you have a subrecipient for part of the project?
Then you have a subrecipient for part of a project. We are in a school building and we would like to replace windows, but the contractor will only work with the school. So are you saying that you are maybe renting space in the school building, but the contractor will only work with part of the school itself? Is that the question? Maybe you can clarify that a little bit for us.
And I think we might need more information from you on that. That's beyond the scope of this to be able to answer that question. We need a lot more details.
Yeah. Your renters, they're saying, okay, so can you have a subrecipient for part of a project? We are in a school building as renters, and we would like to replace windows, but the contractor will only work with the school. I guess my first question is the school okay with having the windows replaced? That's my first question. But I think if you're talking about the contractors and subrecipients are different. And so we can provide some follow-up information on understanding the difference between what a contractor is and what a subrecipient is, because there is a difference in, we don't have time to go over that in the next 4 minutes, but we can provide that follow-up to you and then review it, come to the next session on office hours, and we can answer any questions you have about it. Or if you're not able to make that office hours session, you can always just respond back to our email that delivers that info. And we can also share that info again at office hours, in case others want to review it as well. But we'll get that out to everybody. Maybe we'll just send it to the whole list, and then that way, Anne, if you have follow-up questions, you can just follow up with us directly once we send it to the full list. We don't want to miss anyone who was like, oh, I would love that information too.
And Jennifer, I think we have a DRGR question
Okay.
if you're looking at them.
Yeah. So
Okay.
what is the difference between total budget and project budget? Wouldn't total budget equal all funds and the project budget equal grant funds and the activities equal the project budget? So this is a great question. Total budget refers to your grant plus program income. That's your total budget. We are only talking about CPF dollars when we talk about DRGR. Other dollars do not come into DRGR when it comes to the budgeting within DRGR, okay? So if you have other dollars supporting your project, you do not have to worry about managing the accounting of those or the representation of those in any way inside DRGR. In DRGR, we only manage CPF dollars. So in DRGR language, total budget means your grant plus program income. Projects in DRGR are like buckets. And for other programs that use DRGR, there are about a dozen HUD programs that use DRGR to manage their funds. In other programs, a given program, say for example, the CDBG disaster recovery program, they may have multiple projects, one for housing, one for infrastructure, one for rehab housing versus new construction housing. So when we're working on a disaster recovery initiative, you might have multiple kinds of buckets, and that's your project level. As I mentioned, for CPF, I think most folks are going to have one bucket. So for a lot of people, your total bucket and your project bucket are going to be the same dollar amount. I think that's going to be true for a lot of you.
In DRGR. Yeah.
In DRGR. Yep, this is all DRGR right now. We're living in DRGR land for this question. And then finally, your activities are more defined, detailed activities within your project, and the sum of all of those activities cannot exceed the project budget, which, as I just said, for many of you is just going to be your grant amount. So as you get closer to building out your projects and activities in DRGR, there's going to be a lot more guidance rolling out around DRGR. There's already a good amount in the videos and in the desk guide, but there'll be more. So don't stress too much about this terminology or what it's going to look like. But thank you for that question, because I think it does get confusing, the terminology when we're talking about inside and outside of DRGR. All right.
And I
Great.
guess I should have skipped ahead because this is where we are.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't
Okay.
see any more questions. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that
All
looks like
right.
that does it for today. Thank you all. We are so grateful for your being here and your attention today. We would love your feedback. We always send out an evaluation survey as part of our follow-up. That evaluation link comes from an email address, cohorts@tdainc.org. You've gotten emails from this address before, but just keep an eye out because you will be getting an evaluation link following this session and every session, actually. And we know it's a lot to ask for you evaluations after every session, but they really do help us adjust as we go forward. We're only halfway through the cohort series, not even quite, because we still haven't done the office hours for this one, but we are about halfway through. So any feedback you have would be really valuable as we go forward with wrapping up the rest of the cohort. So with that, I think we will end just a smidge over time today. Thank you all for being here, and we look forward to seeing you on the 27th.
All right. Thank you, everybody.